be working, Aaron. Yes, we're there. Good.
Mom,
Aaron,
how are you?
I'm fine.
Good to hear. Okay, so I'm Aaron Davis, and this is BusinessFrame.com. Thanks for tuning in. I like to interview successful and happy, happy entrepreneurs, so that you might be able to learn from them and grow your business and create the success and happiness that the folks that I'm interviewing have achieved. So, Mom, thank you very much for being on my program.
I'm happy to do so.
Well, so today's guest, if you didn't already know, is my best friend in the whole world. She's one of my greatest advisors, and she's certainly the most solid rock in my life. It's my mother, Louise Davis. And so thanks again. My mom is the executive director of a company called ReEntry out of Raleigh, North Carolina. It's a local nonprofit that offers services to nonviolent offenders in the court systems. So, just to get started, Mom, what did you do? What did you do before reentry?
I have been a social worker my entire life. I went to college and got a sociology degree, not even realizing that that was the study of social habits rather than the work with people. In those days, they didn't advise girls very much. And so
Mom, Mom, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you move forward just a little bit? I'm having trouble hearing you.
Sure.
Okay.
I went to school and got a sociology degree in 1971 and was able to get a job at the University of North Carolina Child Psychiatry Department in the hospital for a child psychiatrist that had received the federal grant. And I worked as her social worker for the first 5 years of my job. And in that, I was doing interviewing with parents of girls who had gotten pregnant and were seeking an abortion at the hospital. So that was from 19... Do you need to answer?
No, I don't.
Okay, from 1971 until 1975.
Wow, okay.
And at that point, your father got graduated from college, and we moved to Winston-Salem. And I didn't work for about 6 months. And then for a couple or 4 years, I didn't do social work. And then we moved back to Raleigh, at which time I went to work for the Department of Social Services in the county where we live, which is White County, North Carolina.
Right. So you studied sociology in college.
Correct.
And then took a job working through the university first, and then working for the county.
Correct.
Got it.
But I was doing a type of social work. The first social work was essentially medical social work, and the second one was working with lower income people, trying to help them pay for their daycare and make sure their situation was clear for them to go to work.
Got it. So what made you decide that you wanted to work in a nonprofit sector?
I can't say that I actually decided. I knew that I didn't like working in the social services office. Not because I didn't like the work, but because I didn't like all the rules. It made it very difficult to provide services to people, and if you work in a nonprofit, you're much more able to devise a system of delivery that enables you to get the work done.
That's a crucial distinction. What's an example, just a brief example of a way that working for a private nonprofit might allow you to do something that a public government agency might not let you do?
Well, let me just give you a real clear example. The people that I was working with in the social services agency were people who were disabled by their medical condition, and their services were determined by how much income they were receiving either by Social Security or by welfare. A person who received Social Security income that was exactly the same as the same amount of money as the person who received welfare income, because maybe one person didn't qualify for Social Security when they worked. Perhaps they were a maid and their employer didn't pay Social Security, so they couldn't get any Social Security.
Right.
But their income, let's say that the amount would be $200 a month that they were entitled to as income. And a woman who had done work at Bell's might be entitled to the same amount of money, $200. But hers was earned income versus welfare.
Okay, so what's
both
the?
of them are getting $200 a month. The woman who gets the welfare income is not going to have any deductible for her medical payments. A woman who earned that money, and it's called Social Security, is going to be required to have a deductible for the first $200.
Okay, so you've got somebody that is earned income versus non-earned income. How? Okay, so the delivery system to them would be what? So how would you be able to help that person, those two people, differently in private agency versus a public agency?
Well, we didn't work with the same kind of problem, but there would be no income test at all in my nonprofit.
Ah, so if a person needed help, they needed help, and you gave them help regardless of.
Exactly.
I see.
Based on the need versus what kind of income.
Right. Not what the stipulations were that the government or some agency put forth.
Exactly.
Got it. That's important.
My desire has always been to be able to serve people correctly.
Got it.
That when I observe a need and identify how to solve it, that I go about trying to do that solution as quickly as possible.
Wow. Okay. Great. Well, so what did you learn? And I know this is rolling back the clock a little bit, but what did you learn on the job that they didn't tell you about in school, or that you couldn't have known about in an interview process, or in that sort of scenario? What did you learn as you started to roll your sleeves up and get into the nitty-gritty that you didn't learn in the classroom?
Well, first of all, when you're delivering services to people that are in need, you aren't trained at all to be a business person. That's not even, in those days, that was not part of the discussion. We were talking about methods of service and the way you treat your client and confidentiality and all of those things that are person related. Well, in my job, I also had responsibility for paying the bills and selecting the vendors for our services and making sure the bills were paid.
Oh, wow.
Communicating with the government and making sure that the funding sources were satisfied and all of those kinds of things. And I have to say that I didn't plan this, but when I took over the agency, the previous director had not paid bills, and the most important being an IRS bill. So there was a federal lien against our organization for the unpaid withholding tax.
And this is when you became the director?
Yes.
And you
but
were...
I didn't know it until after I was already.
Ah, so the underlying...
It's $67,000. And in the world of nonprofits, that's just a huge amount of money to have a debt, because you aren't allowed to use any of your nonprofit funding to pay debt. It's only allowed to pay for programs. So if you don't have an asset that is equal to the debt, then you just have to close because you're bankrupt.
Right.
And the board of directors who I reported to had no idea either, because they hadn't been minding the store. So as a result, we were in a really big mess.
Wow. So one of the things that you did, you learned as you got in there and you started to roll your sleeves up a little bit, were business skills. Just
every single kind. Yes, I got an auditor in place. I consolidated all the bank accounts from 7 to 1. I don't know why we had 7, but we did. I closed down the house, which was essentially the only asset we had. We had a halfway house that we sold to the county or actually the city of Raleigh, for the amount that the lien was, the total amount. and satisfied the ring and continued on.
Wow, it seems like a that certainly answers my question. Is that while you were studying how to best serve people and how to being professional in that setting, and this is obviously before HIPAA, but some of those same guidelines and that sort of thing, but a business background was very important. So, question: essential. Now, do you think that's crucial for somebody in an entry level, or just starting out, or is that obviously perhaps a good foundation, or is that something that's more geared towards management?
I personally think that every social worker that trains in social work schools should have at least a simple exposure to ethics and to what business practices should be in place, because you may or may not know that when you go into an agency. Suppose you're just an employee and these things are going on. Like maybe the bills aren't being paid and the collectors are calling, because that was happening.
Sure.
Then you would be aware. That would make you aware that perhaps this would be a good place to work.
Wow.
And if you don't know that, it's not something you hear in school.
No.
I certainly never been exposed to it.
Certainly not. So, really quick question. The first thing that comes to my mind. Okay, so you get out of school, you're really excited to help people. You're in this agency. You guys are doing things, but then you sort of land in the position of a directorship role and realize that there's this big mess, financial, business-related mess, and you didn't really have that background of a business background. Why not throw in the towel and just say, this isn't for me?
Because I just didn't believe that was in the cards. I felt like it was sort of the same thing as solving a social work problem. That obviously there were steps to take and there were ways to do it, and I got my board involved who had never met me before. All of this happened very peculiarly. That the people that I was working with, didn't have anybody else in place either, because the guy had left. And
right.
There I was. And, sometimes you just walk into these things and they're a mess. And you just have to either hold your head up and figure it out or not.
Wow.
If we hadn't had, again, I repeat, if we hadn't had a halfway house to sell and the city wanted to buy it, then we probably would have gone under.
Right.
And I would have had to walk away.
Wow.
But as it worked out, the services were needed. The people we were supplying services to wanted us, and it all fit together.
Wow. And briefly, how long did it take between the time when you got into this role and realized that you saw the writing on the wall to having your head above water, where you had a little bit of breathing room and were able to move around without quite as much business duress, per se?
Probably a year and a half.
Okay. So that's quite a bit of sticking to your plan and keeping your head down and
through it. Yeah, because I had to work with the IRS, I had to work with funding sources, I had to work with the board of directors, and most of the employees at that point were gone, because the program had really gone through a lot of changes, not so much because of malfeasance, but the programs had diminished.
Wow.
And that was part of the. I think the person before was not dishonest in taking money, but money had ceased to come, sort of like what's happening with recession. And instead of closing down programs, he kept shifting it from one to another, and he didn't have sufficient funds to pay for what he was running.
Wow. So for the young person that's coming into this sort of scenario now, and getting their hand, they've landed in a job. They were maybe an entry level job 2 years ago. The management has since been laid off because, for whatever reason, as the recession bears on. Is there any sort of kernel of advice that you might be able to offer them to say, if here's something you might want to keep in mind, such that it's not quite as painful, or anything like that?
Well, I would say that the talent that you have to get through something like this can help you in any life event. recognizing that things are difficult sometimes, but if you can figure a way to get through them, that it is useful to you throughout your life.
So it transcends work into home.
Absolutely, because there are always going to be difficult situations of one type or another.
Interesting.
And that what you do is tell the truth to everybody you're with, so that there are no secrets, and that you do the best you can. And sometimes people blame the messenger, which they did, because they were pretty embarrassed that this whole mess was coming back to them, the board of directors. But, through it all, I made some really good friends, and ReEntry has stayed strong and good through all these years.
Wow. Tell the truth and do your best. That's why I love you, and that's why you're my mom. So,
so no matter what happens, you've got to just let people know what the facts are. Don't run away from the bad situations.
Sure. What are 3 things, in your opinion, that have contributed? How long has ReEntry been in business since you've been at the helm?
Since I've been there since 1984.
1984. So that's 17 years.
No, 84.
84. 27 years.
Yeah.
Holy moly, Mom. Wow. Yeah, I guess my math wasn't too good there. 27 years. That's amazing. So the list, I'm sure, is much longer than 3. But if you had to put 1, 2, 3, here are the things that contributed to our longevity and subsequently your success. What would those items be?
Being very clear about what our purpose was. You know how they always say it's the message, stupid? That we have always had a mission statement, and that was to work with selected offenders to assist them to make correct life decisions, which is sort of a broad mission statement. But we've done that through letting them get out of jail before their trial date, and we've done it for first offender teens, and we've done it for for felons. That our goal has always been really straightforward. We haven't tried to get into a lot of different scenarios. I think that when you try to do too much for too many people, that sometimes you get lost in the shuffle. It's very important to have enough money to run your operation, and that when you don't get the money, as disappointing as that may be, do not go forward with it, because your funding source depends on you doing what you say you're going to do. You can get into very serious ethical, financial, and IRS trouble by doing a program that you are not authorized to do.
Sure.
So if you don't get exactly what you asked for the money that you've asked for, then you just can't do that program.
Okay, so the first 2 things I hear from that are, number 1 is identify your mission and stick with it. Don't try to be everything to everybody.
Right.
Number 2 is create a budget and stick with that budget. And if you don't, for whatever reason, if you don't get that money, then scrap those plans.
And just keep, again, out there with the information to whoever is expecting your outcome that's different than what you originally said.
Sure.
And if as you're going along, some great idea comes up, you're always free to let your funding source know that. And sometimes you'll get special money on the side, which I have been very fortunate to get on several occasions.
You know, when you mean special money on the side, what is that like is that a backroom card deal?
Donations from unknown sources that just show up.
They want to help and contribute.
Read about you in the paper or saw you on television and send you money.
Sure.
And that's happened over the years. I mean, there are also, regular grants and sources that you can find in lists and Google and what have you. But the private donors that just call up and say, I really love what you're doing, here's the money, is quite wonderful when it happens.
Wow. Now, is there any way to cultivate that, or is that something that sort of happens organically over doing the right thing for over time?
I think it's both ways. I think there's some groups that really do have specialty people that work toward cultivating, and I'm sure that that's the most effective way to do it. But in my world, because I don't have the budget to pay a person, we just try to do the very best we can with the programs that we have, and try to do as much advertising and information about it in the community, so that word of mouth is it more than otherwise, that we end up getting good response by pure luck, I think. I would like to think that it was something I did, but I don't know that it is.
Sure.
There are better ways to do it, probably, than I do it.
Sure. Well, if I do say so myself, you've done a pretty good job. 27 years is no drop in the bucket. Around the house, we've always, everything it felt like growing up was always, I felt like you always had a plan. You always knew what was coming up in the near future, in a little bit farther out, maybe 6 months, a year out. Is there any sort of prescription for a nonprofit to budget their time and efforts and plan such that you don't get caught red-handed with unexpected? Is it quarterly? Do you do it monthly, weekly?
Well, I think that there are probably several things that do well for that. You need to look at your financials monthly.
Okay, and is that historical financials?
Yeah.
Okay.
You really need to see everything that's coming in and going out.
Okay.
Because if, like in our real serious budget crisis that's going on in our state right now, it's possible that our governor could say mid-year, and we are mid-year, give me back the money I promise you, because there's such a shortfall. So we need to be very careful about spending our money, and not to, you just need to be aware of what the situation is. Because we haven't always been in this situation, but right now we're in it. And you don't want to be in a situation where you have to lay off people because you spend every penny you have.
Right. So,
and even if you have surplus, keep it for a rainy day. I mean, that might sound frugal and a little bit chinchy, but it just works out better.
Right.
And so in terms of planning, the programs are pretty much set because they're expected, and there's an ongoing referral base that comes to us. So we have a huge number of people that are coming through our doors. But in terms of how we do it, is pretty limited and I think, pretty efficient for the most part. That we try to do what's necessary with the minimum staff and minimum equipment.
Right. Great. Well, one of my favorite things about you being my mom is the fact that you always seem to be able to look at the brighter side of things, and you're welcome. And in business in general, I think it goes to say that right now more than ever, it's crucial to keep a positive attitude and to remain happy. So part of the reason why I started Business Frame and why I'm interviewing people is not only how others can learn how to be successful, but also to have a positive outlook and how do they remain happy. So, Mom, what's your take on that? How do you keep a positive attitude?
Well, I think number one, you need to give yourself credit for the things you do well. That would be the first thing.
Certainly.
Remember, like they say every day, make a list in your mind, if you don't have a list in writing, of the things you're grateful for, that you're lucky to have. Surround yourself with positive people. When you're making hiring decisions, when you have a notion that the person is always coming up with negatives, that perhaps that's not the right person in the nonprofit world. I mean, they may not be the right person anywhere, but in my case, nonprofit people need to be looking for a new solution, not a new problem.
Sure. Well, in that light, how do you deal with folks that are naysayers and say, you guys aren't doing anything, or you're not your programs don't work, and you've got the data, you know what does and what doesn't. How do you deal with people that are negative and that maybe it's an outsider or something?
Well, generally the people that are negative are trying to do away with us. It's competition. It's not so much the people using our service.
Right, but how do you remain in a positive mental state in spite of them projecting that negativity on you?
Well, generally we try to beef up our own resources among ourselves, but we also, take pride in overcoming them because they're not telling the truth. Generally, the people that are naysaying from an erroneous or not true source.
Sure.
In our case, now, that could be different in other realms, but in our case, what we do really works, and it's worked for all these years. And it's worked so well that our county government supports it, and our state government supports it, and we have a good recidivism rate. So I guess, as long as the state and the county and the local government wants to have the outcomes that we're getting, then we are cheaper and more efficient at delivering those outcomes than any other group that could do it.
Well said. So, what advice for someone, a young person that's coming out of school and or maybe there's a lot of job transition or career transition going on in the workplace right now, where someone was in business and they're moving to nonprofit, or they were in school and they're getting into working, or maybe they've not had a job, and now because of a decrease in their family's income, now they need to get a job, and so there's more people that are getting into the nonprofit sector. Do you have any advice for folks that are just starting out in your field?
My sense would be it's worthwhile taking an internship, not for pay, to get some skills, but also to see about openings. Sometimes when you're in an internship position or a volunteer position, that can be expanded into a potential workplace. Or you may hear about a workplace opportunity in the field by being in that volunteer position.
Do you think that's a trend that within nonprofits? I mean, I'm sure it's outside nonprofits as well, but that they hire from within?
I know that I would prefer to have somebody that's actually worked with me, or that has worked in a similar profession, because ours is a very comprehensive work that requires a lot of different database knowledges, and you can't just walk into it. You have to be willing to transcend court, criminal, and social work all at the same time. And some people can't do that well. I mean, they're uncomfortable with untidy edges, and this is very untidy. But if you like that kind of thing, you'd be thrilled by it.
Sure.
But you just have to know that that's what you're after, and until you're doing it, you don't really know.
Okay. Last question. What's on the horizon? Maybe not necessarily for your particular business. But what would you say is a trend that may be a shift in your market, in your business model? Where's it going such that people that might be interested can be prepared and put their best foot forward?
Well, what I understand is that the entire country is trying to go away from building huge prisons. It's called justice reinvestment, and it's going through the country state by state. North Carolina right now has a grant from the group that's running it, and it's the idea of convincing legislators that building huge prisons is really not cost effective in any way, shape, or form. That obviously we need prisons in our society, but we don't need to keep building them. We need to do things in the community that work better and have better results for the money. And so that's why it's called reinvestment, to take money that would ordinarily be spent by government and use it to provide services. And my thought is that that's the way of the world, that doing services in the community such as mental health, education, prevention, rehabilitation, all of those things that we think as human services have to be delivered in the community. They can't be delivered so much in institutions. And that is the way of the world. I think it's just too expensive to put people in buildings and hope for the best.
It seems like a trend. Everything from marketing amongst companies to electoral campaigns to now I'm hearing nonprofits is that it's moving from what was sort of the status quo was sort of a top-down approach. Is you got a group of people that say, here's what we're going to do, and we're going to make it as big and strong as we possibly can, and there it is, to more of a grassroots bottom-up approach where it's, we're gonna use innovation and we're gonna use alternative means to get our point across, because oftentimes they're better.
Well, it's certainly more adaptive and nimble. Like you were asking me earlier about what was the difference between the state and the county versus nonprofit. And whenever we see a problem, we're able to just change it. I mean, you identify the problem, we talk about it, we make sure it doesn't affect anybody negatively, and then we just change it.
We just do it.
If it's not functional.
Right.
But sometimes when you get in bureaucracies, whether it's a private sector or a public sector, it gets bogged down because too many people are involved in the decision.
I guess it's also a little bit easier to change a program than it is to demolish a concrete building as well.
Exactly.
So.
And we've enjoyed doing that.
Right. Well, Mom, that's all the time we've got for today. I appreciate it so much. This has been some great insight, I think, for our viewers, and it's also been some good insight for me. So thanks.
You're very welcome.
All right. Well, I'm Aaron Davis, and this has been BusinessFrame.com. I appreciate you tuning in. If you appreciate what you see here, please be sure to forward it along to your friends and followers on Twitter and Facebook. And tune in again soon. Take good care.